The cameras rolled, and the lights inside the studio were warmer than they needed to be. Denzel Washington, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, smiled politely as he sat on the panel couch of The View. He was there to promote his latest film, a gritty drama about justice, forgiveness, and redemption. The audience clapped. The hosts beamed. But under the bright stage lights, something subtle was already shifting. Joy Behar leaned forward, her tone light but loaded. "So, Denzel? Another powerful role. Another Oscar buzz, I hear. But you've always been drawn to these themes of justice, haven't you? Even off-screen." Denzel nodded. "I try to tell stories that matter." Joy tilted her head, even the ones from Chad. A sudden stillness fell over the set. The audience, unaware, chuckled softly. But Denzel didn't laugh. His smile tightened. He looked at Joy, blinking once. "I'm not sure I follow." Joy reached down, picked up a note card, and glanced at it for effect. There was a photo. You at a UN summit in N'Djamena, back in 2006. It circulated years ago, then vanished. Some people said it was fake, but there's been a leak. It's back. The studio was silent now. Even Whoopi Goldberg looked unsure. "That photo was taken out of context," Denzel said firmly. "I was part of a cultural delegation. We were invited to talk about reconciliation, art, healing." Joy's voice grew sharper. "You sure it wasn't something else? Maybe part of what's now being called Echo Blue?" Denzel flinched. It was slight, but real. He shifted in his seat. "I think you've been misinformed." Joy leaned closer. "Then what are the Echo Blue papers, Denzel? Why does your name appear in that memo with a U.S. envoy from the Pentagon?" The moment was electric. The cameras caught everything. Denzel stared back at her, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he removed the microphone from his lapel, stood up, and walked off the set. The audience gasped. The hosts froze. The camera didn't cut away. It followed him as he disappeared behind the curtain. It's a single voice from the audience muttered, "What just happened?" What happened was chaos. Within minutes, Twitter exploded. Hashtag Denzel Walks Off started trending in 20 countries. Old clips resurfaced. Some showed him in dusty African villages, smiling with children. Others, grainy, low-resolution images hinted at something darker. Headlines raced through news feeds. Denzel Washington linked to UN intelligence mission. Joy Behar confronts Hollywood icon on live TV. What is Operation Echo Blue? But far beyond the reach of social media, something far more serious had been triggered. In Washington, a red-level alert was quietly issued within a secured server at Langley. In London, a deputy from the Foreign Office made an unscheduled call to the embassy in N'Djamena. In Brussels, 3 diplomats canceled dinner reservations and headed into a closed-door briefing about a reclassified peacekeeping operation from 2006. The leak was real in a quiet apartment in Brooklyn. A seasoned journalist named Rachel Moretti was watching the clip on loop. She wasn't shocked. She had been sitting on something, an encrypted flash drive she received 6 months ago from a contact known only as Layla Kareem. The drive had sat in her desk drawer untouched. It's too dangerous, too incomplete. Until now, Rachel plugged it into her laptop and watched the screen flicker. A document opened. Then another. Then a video blurred, shaky, showing a group of UN officials exiting a summit tent in the desert heat. Among them, unmistakable, was Denzel Washington. She clicked on a folder labeled Phase Echo. Inside was a memo, typed in clean diplomatic format with a signature from a U.S. envoy. Below that, another name, mostly redacted except for 2 initials at the bottom. D.W. Rachel stared at the screen. Her heart pounded. She reached for her phone. Across the Atlantic, Clint Eastwood sat alone in his ranch office in Carmel, watching an old recording from Real Time with Bill Maher. The segment had aired just a week ago. Clint had gone on to promote a war film, but the conversation had drifted. "You ever regret not speaking up more back then?" Bill had asked, half joking. Clint had stared at him for a beat and then replied, "Sometimes silence isn't peace. Sometimes it's camouflage." Bill had laughed at the audience too. Pot Clint hadn't smiled. Now Clint reached for a locked drawer in his desk. Inside was a yellowed photo he and Denzel sitting at a folding table, surrounded by UN flags, a map of Darfur behind them. On the back of the photo, a scribbled note read, "Echo Blue Briefing, Phase 1. He hadn't looked at that photo in years. But now it was back. And it wasn't going away this time. Back in Brooklyn, Rachel opened a secure line. She had a contact, a retired general. A man who once served as the strategic coordinator for something called cultural stabilization through soft diplomacy. Left a message, "General Beckett, I need to talk. It's about Echo Blue and Denzel Washington." The phone call came just after midnight. Rachel Moretti was still at her desk, eyes bloodshot from scanning digital folders and classified PDFs. Her room was dim except for the pale glow of her laptop. The message on her burner phone was brief. "Pier 17, 3 a.m., come alone." No name, no voice. But she knew who it was, General Thomas Beckett. She grabbed her coat, stuffed the flash drive into her inner pocket, and slipped out into the freezing Brooklyn night. Pier 17 was empty at that hour. The water lapped quietly against the dock pilings. A foghorn groaned somewhere across the river. Rachel waited until she saw the silhouette emerge from behind a cargo container tall, slow-moving, slightly hunched from age, but unmistakably military. General Beckett didn't speak right away. He handed her a manila envelope sealed with a faded U.S. Department of Defense stamp. "Open it later," he said. "Some things are easier to swallow when you're not being watched." "I need to know what Echo Blue was," Rachel said, keeping her voice steady. "Denzel Washington just walked off live television because someone said those words." Beckett took a deep breath, staring out at the black water. Echo Blue wasn't a war. It was a performance. A stage play dressed up in humanitarian language. She frowned. "What does that mean?" In 2005, the UN and several Western governments were under pressure to stabilize Darfur, not just militarily, but emotionally. The optics were bad: genocide, famine, civil war. So someone came up with a solution: weaponize celebrity. Bring in trusted Western faces, artists, activists, icons, and use them to calm populations. Discredit rebel narratives and build sympathy. For intervention. That was phase 1. Rachel's mind raced. "And phase 2? Information operations," he said flatly. "Using those same celebrities to influence Western public opinion. If people saw someone like Denzel handing out food, hugging children, they'd believe the mission was noble, even if it wasn't." So he was used. Beckett looked at her. It was perfect. Respected, private, unpolitical, and public. But smarter than they expected. He started asking questions by the end of 2006. That's when they shut it all down. Erased the paper trail, buried the signatures, and they made sure if it ever came back, he'd be seen as complicit, not misled. Rachel opened her mouth, but Beckett held up a hand. "You don't know what it's like to have your face printed on the cover of propaganda. Pamphlets in 10 different languages." He saw one in a burned-out village, his own photo smiling, handing out books with a message in Arabic underneath that said, "These people are here to protect you. Trust them. Report dissent." He snapped after that. You want to know why he walked off The View? It's because Joy said the words he's been trying to forget for 18 years. He turned to leave but paused. "Don't contact me again." By the time Rachel returned to her apartment, the envelope burned like fire in her hand. Inside were 6 pages, each marked "Top Secret" and a photograph. It showed Denzel standing beside a convoy of UN trucks, his face weathered, his eyes hollow. Behind him, what appeared to be a temporary detainment site, and in the corner, barely visible, was another figure: Clint Eastwood. She looked again. The date was March 2006. Rachel sat down, breathing hard. Clint had mentioned nothing about ever being involved. But if he was there, her phone buzzed again. This time it was Maria Vasquez, a UN investigator based in Brussels. Rachel had reached out to her weeks ago about Halcyon and Echo Blue. Maria had gone silent until now. "I just got access to an old internal briefing," Maria whispered through a secure line. "It confirms what your file says, but there's something worse." Rachel stiffened. "What?" The cultural liaisons were also used to facilitate identity manipulation. The UN gave them forged credentials, blank passports, even diplomatic immunity in regions where civilians were disappearing. Some of those celebrities may have unknowingly signed off on operations that ended in mass relocations. Disappearances. Rachel felt her stomach churn. Maria added, "And there's one more thing. A new leak dropped an hour ago. Footage from inside a closed room. Summit in 2006. It shows a heated argument between a U.S. envoy, two UN officials, and a translator." "Denzel?" Rachel asked. "No," Maria said. "The translator was Layla Karim, and she's screaming, 'You promised you would not use him like this.'" Rachel froze. "You have the file. I'm sending it now." "But Rachel, if this goes public, it's not just careers at risk. It's governments. It's the idea of peacekeeping itself." Rachel clicked on the incoming transfer. "Somewhere in Los Angeles." Denzel Washington sat in the back seat of a black car, the city lights flickering past the window. His phone buzzed. He didn't pick it up. Instead, he pulled a folded photo from his coat pocket. The video file loaded slowly on Rachel's screen, each second a silent countdown into a past too raw to ignore. The footage, unedited and grainy, showed a temporary UN structure in El Fasher, northern Darfur. Fluorescent lights buzzed above. The arguing voices and the handheld camera panned shakily across a tense room. There was no stage, no script. Just a woman, Layla Karim, standing between two armed guards, her voice fierce and desperate. "You used him," she yelled. "He was supposed to speak for hope, not for strategy." One of the men, wearing a U.S. diplomatic badge, responded coldly. "He signed the forms, Ms. Karim. He knew what Echo Blue was built for. So did you." "No," she snapped. "We thought it was cultural outreach. Books, schools, clinics, not surveillance. Not relocation orders buried inside media coverage." Rachel paused the video. In the corner of the frame was Denzel, sitting silent, his face unreadable, his hands clasped, eyes on the table. He didn't look like a man in command. He looked like a man trapped in something far bigger than himself. She scrolled forward. The next scene was even worse satellite footage. A convoy of white UN trucks with small black dots emerging from villages and being herded into makeshift camps. Overlay text read, "Operation Phase Echo, Psychological Assurance Zone B." Rachel sank back into her chair. It wasn't a peacekeeping mission. It had been narrative control. A live broadcast of safety while displacements happened quietly in the background. She called Maria back immediately. "Where did you get this?" The footage came through an encrypted server tagged Gray Ribbon. Same people who exposed Halcyon last year, whoever they are, they're painting a picture that shows global media and soft power were just the new battlefield. And Denzel, Rachel asked. Maria was quiet. "There's more. Clint Eastwood gave testimony in 2008 classified, under a UN agreement. In it, he describes Denzel as a reluctant asset. He said the man was fed half-truths, used because of who he was. And when he asked too many questions, they shut him out." Rachel felt the walls closing in. Does Denzel know this exists? Don't think so, but Joy Behar might. There's an internal ABC memo from that year. It outlines possible liabilities involving former UN Goodwill guests. Her name is listed under witness awareness protocols. Rachel blinked. "You're telling me Joy Behar knew back then?" "I think she's been sitting on this for years," Maria whispered. And her question on air? That wasn't an accident. That was the opening shot of something much bigger. Half a world away, in a discreet Beverly Hills compound, Denzel was pacing. He hadn't spoken to anyone since walking off set. His publicist had been bombarded with press inquiries, fan theories, and leaked images. But Denzel wasn't worried about the public. He was worried about memory, about what he remembered and what he didn't. He opened a drawer in his study. Inside was a file he'd kept sealed for over a decade. He never showed it to anyone, not even his closest friends. It contained faded travel documents, a dusty UNID card, and a copy of the Project Breathe Co. Blue, strategic deployment of public figures in conflict regions. His name wasn't listed, but his initials were scribbled in pencil on the margins of multiple pages. Underlines, notes, one sentence circled in red. Phase 2 must ensure narrative continuity on screen and off. He remembered the interviews, the photo ops, the sense that everything was always too controlled. The guides who steered every conversation. The translators who said things he didn't remember hearing. And then there were the disappearances. A boy named Yusuf. Another girl, Amal. They had come to him with drawings, letters. They were gone days later. The official word was relocation. But even then, something felt wrong. He looked at the photo again. Clint had warned him, hadn't he? Years ago, quietly over coffee in London. They'll smile to your face and cut your soul behind your back. Now it was all unraveling. Not in private, not in a courtroom, but on The View. A morning show turned political minefield. And Joy B., her sarcastic, sharp, underestimated, was in the middle of it. Back at her apartment, Rachel's inbox dinged. A new message. No sender, just a subject line. The red desk. She opened it. Inside was a single image. Joy Behar sitting behind a desk at the UN headquarters in Geneva. 2006. She wasn't interviewing. She was leading a private roundtable, one that included several high-ranking diplomats. The caption read, Committee for Strategic Humanitarian Communications. Rachel stared in disbelief. Behar hadn't just witnessed the mission, she had managed its narrative outreach committee. Suddenly, the pieces aligned. Joy had pushed Denzel on air because something was about to surface, something she couldn't stop. She didn't want to destroy him. She wanted to trigger the truth, live, where it couldn't be buried. Rachel opened a secure chat. She typed one sentence to Maria. Behar's not a journalist. She was one of the architects. Then she deleted it because if that was truth, then nothing on television was ever just television again. Joy Behar stood in her dressing room, staring into the mirror, but not seeing her reflection. Her phone was buzzing with alerts, press inquiries, angry producers, even a few death threats. The network was in chaos. The segment had gone viral, and not in the way anyone expected. Denzel Washington's walk-off had shattered the morning show, Bubba, and the internet was feeding on the fallout like piranhas. But she hadn't asked the question to humiliate him. She'd asked it because she knew the truth was finally surfacing. And time was running out. She picked up a worn folder from the vanity. Inside were clippings, photos, notes in her handwriting, memories from a chapter of her life she had buried. Behind television laughter and progressive one-liners, she flipped to a yellow document bearing the header. Committee for Strategic Humanitarian Communications, Geneva. 2006. Her signature was at the bottom, along with 8 others. Some now deceased, others serving in silent, powerful roles across government and media. She had never wanted this to come back. But after the gray ribbon leaks and the resurfacing of Echo Blue, it was clear the curtain was about to fall and everyone would be exposed. Back in Brooklyn, Rachel Moretti was already working through a timeline. She had tacked printouts all over her wall, satellite photos, intercepted memos, even stills from Denzel's Darfur mission. In the center, she pinned the newly discovered image of Joy sitting behind that end desk. The woman America knew as a daytime host had once been a strategist for one of the most controversial psychological operations in modern history. Maria Vasquez called her voice sharp. There's movement in Brussels. The UN is preparing for emergency hearings. They've received intelligence suggesting several of the Echo Blue files are about to go public. But here's the kicker. Joy Behar's name is on the original clearance request for cultural envoy deployments. Not just Denzel, others too. Rachel rubbed her forehead. So she was part of selecting the celebrity assets? She was one of 3 people who signed off on final approvals, and now she's what? Trying to make it right. Maybe she's playing the only hand she has left before someone else does it for her. Meanwhile, in Corsica, Denzel received an encrypted package. No sender. No note. Just a silver USB drive and a printed quote taped to the side. If silence is peace, then truth is war. He stared at it for a long time before inserting it into a secure laptop. The screen came alive with folders and filtered transcripts, audio logs, video evidence. One file stood out. A video dated August 2006, location tagged El Janina. It showed him stepping out of a UN helicopter, followed by children and journalists. But in the background, 2 men were loading crates into a truck under a tarpaulin marked medical supplies. The manifest, linked in the same folder, listed them as emergency kits. A second internal version ever meant for public eyes called them what they truly were: adaptive surveillance nodes and non-lethal crowd control dispersals. Weapons disguised as aid. Hidden behind his face, his name, his presence. He stared at the screen in disbelief, his hands clenched into fists. They had used him, not just as a spokesperson, as a distraction. A human cover for operations he'd never consented to. Then came the audio clip. Joy Behar's voice. Younger, colder. We need the emotional resonance to override skepticism. That's why we chose Washington. He reads as trust. If we secure enough footage, we can suppress fallout from the Northern Corridor clearances. The public will never connect the convoys with military strategy, not if he's holding a baby in every broadcast. He sat back in his chair, stunned. The woman who had grilled him on live television had written the script behind his performance 18 years earlier. Back in New York, Rachel made a decision. She sent a secure invite to Joy's team, requesting an exclusive off-air interview, no producers, no handlers, just her and a recorder. The reply came 10 minutes later. One word: accepted. They met in a private lounge at a midtown hotel. Room was quiet, the air still. Rachel began slowly. You were there, not as media, as part of the strategy. Joy sipped her coffee, eyes tired. I was young, ambitious. They said we could help stabilize post-conflict regions by shaping the narrative. We thought if the story made people feel hope, it would give the region time to breathe. But the camps, Rachel said, the relocations, the children that disappeared. Joy didn't respond right away. The news broke before dawn's CNN, Al Jazeera, and Sky News all led with the same headline. Whistleblower leak reveals Hollywood's role in covert UN. Operation Echo Blue confirmed. Clips from the leaked Echo Blue video played in loops. Denzel stepping off the helicopter, the crates marked medical supplies in the background. And Joy Behar's old audio surfaced, dissected by anchors and experts with growing alarm. By mid-morning, The Hague had called for an emergency session of the International Media and Peacekeeping Tribunal. Multiple governments were named in the documents, including high-ranking UN officials, U.S. State Department advisors, and several unnamed media strategists. But the public wanted one answer most of all. Did Denzel Washington know? He sat in silence as the world debated his guilt. Outside his Corsican estate, Drones hovered and reporters camped in rented cars. He hadn't spoken to his lawyer. He hadn't called his family. He kept watching the same 5-second loop of the clip from El Janina the crates. The children, the staged smiles. He remembered the boy, Yusuf, whose drawings he'd taken home. The girl who never returned after the press left. His phone buzzed. It was Rachel. He hesitated, then answered. "Got a call from Geneva," she said quickly. "They want you to testify at the tribunal." Denzel exhaled. "So it's come to that. They're offering immunity. If you speak honestly about what you saw and what you were told, they'll clear you of liability. But they want everything. Names, orders, conversations. They want me to burn the system I helped decorate," he said bitterly. "They want the truth," Rachel replied. "You are the only one with the camera pointed at your face. If you stay silent, you'll be remembered as the lie, not the victim of one." There was a long pause. "I'll do it," Denzel said. "But I want it to be live. No edits, no closed door." Back in New York, Joy Behar returned to the studio for the first time since the broadcast. Her seat at the table felt colder now. Heavier. The audience didn't cheer like before. Some looked confused. Some stared. The producers were on edge. Every legal department in the building had reviewed the footage from the past week. And there were whispers that Joy's position might be reconsidered, but she didn't care anymore. She had already started drafting her statement. It was half confession, half apology. The part that scared her most wasn't the press or the tribunal, was the face of a man she'd helped recruit, a man she had admired and, in some ways, used. Meanwhile, Clint Eastwood was nowhere to be found. His home in Carmel was empty. His lawyers declined all interviews. But an unmarked envelope arrived on Rachel's doorstep later that night. Inside was a photograph of Clint at the 2006 Echo Blue base. A page from an internal report titled Phase Coordination Meeting, Covert Messaging Strategies. And a handwritten note. Not all directors call action with a camera. Some use silence. C.E. Rachel forwarded it to Maria Vasquez, who had already landed in The Hague. The tribunal building had been fortified for the hearings. Journalists lining the streets, global delegations seated. The eyes of the world were fixed on one question. Could peacekeeping ever be trusted again? The day of the testimony arrived. Denzel entered the chamber through a side door, avoiding the cameras until the last second. He wore a simple black suit, no tie. His face was tired but steady. The lead investigator began. "Mr. Washington, thank you for agreeing to testify. You understand that you are not under formal indictment, but that your role as a public envoy during Echo Blue has placed you at the center of this inquiry." "I understand," he replied. "Do you acknowledge that you were aware of the psychological operations being conducted under the name Echo Blue?" "No," Denzel said. "Not. At first, I was told I'd be promoting peace, helping with education, bringing visibility to regions that needed aid. But by the time I realized what was really happening, the damage was already done." "What changed your view?" "The children disappeared. The speeches were rewritten. My interviews were scripted. I remember being told to smile during a medical delivery. I thought it was medicine. Later I learned it was tracking equipment, packed next to real supplies to hide their transport." He paused. The chamber was silent. "And then I saw my own face on posters telling refugees to report each other. That's when I stopped believing I was helping." He looked up. Cameras zoomed in. "I am not innocent. I didn't ask enough questions. I didn't walk away soon enough. But I was never given the truth. I was never told that my name, my face, my voice were being used to clean up war crimes." There were murmurs in the gallery. The judges leaned in. The prosecutor asked gently, "Why did you walk off the show, Mr. Washington?" Denzel looked directly at the camera. "Because Joy Behar said, 'Echo Blue,' and I realized for the first time in nearly 20 years someone else remembered what they buried. She forced me to look at the truth, live. I couldn't lie anymore. Back in the ABC studio, Joy watched the broadcast alone. She wiped tears from her eyes, not for herself, for the weight they had all carried too long. In the final moments of his testimony, Denzel turned back to the tribunal and added, "I came here today not to clear my name, but to make sure no one can ever use peace as camouflage again. We can't heal if we keep pretending this never happened." When he finished, the courtroom remained still for several beats. Then, for the first time in tribunal history, all 9 judges rose, in silence. A symbolic gesture, not of judgment, but of witness. And far beyond the chamber walls, millions of viewers watching live across the world sat in that same silence. Not in outrage, but in reckoning. Rain fell in a quiet rhythm on the cobblestones outside the tribunal building in The Hague. Inside, the echo of Denzel Washington's testimony still lingered in the marble halls like an unresolved chord. Every media outlet across the globe had seized the moment, his words clipped, dissected, reposted. For some, it was a confession. For others, it was an indictment of something much larger than him. The illusion of humanitarian purity, Rachel. Moretti sat with Maria Vasquez in a small conference room, both women exhausted but still wired from the broadcast. They stared at a projected map of Darfur on the wall, now overlaid with the declassified Echo Blue zones. There were too many circles, too many camps, too many blank spots where names like Youssef and Amal once belonged. This was never about just one man, Maria said. Echo Blue was systemic, multi-layered. They recruited cultural assets not only to shift global narratives, but to suppress local dissent. Smile for the West, silence the East. Rachel nodded slowly. And Joy. Behar was in the middle of it, not just as a strategist, but as a keeper of the fire. She saw the structure fall apart in real time and did nothing for nearly 2 decades. She did something now, Maria replied. Rachel didn't argue. She knew Joy's decision to confront. Denzel on live television wasn't meant to destroy him. It was a torch passed in desperation. But the consequences were far from over. That afternoon, tribunal officials released a second list, this time redacted. But enough details leaked to spark another wave of unrest. The list named 5 prominent individuals currently active in media and politics who had allegedly served as coordinators in Echo Blue's second phase. Anonymous sources claimed that Clint Eastwood was among them, though his name was still officially withheld. Suddenly, attention turned toward him not as a revered filmmaker, but as a possible orchestrator of soft power manipulation. Still, Clint remained silent, but not for long. That evening, a pre-recorded video appeared online. No press conference, no captions. Just Clint Eastwood sitting at an old wooden desk in a cabin, his voice weathered but calm. "I'm not going to give you the speech you want," he began, "because what you want is an apology dressed in spin. And what I've got is history, ugly, complicated, and true." He looked straight into the camera. Echo Blue started with a simple lie, that the best way to protect people was to control. The story they believed, I didn't invent that lie, but I signed off on it. I told myself we were doing the right thing. That using trusted faces to calm a population was better than using soldiers. But peace that's bought with illusion is just a longer war. He paused, and Yai recruited people. Good people. People like Denzel Washington. He didn't know what we were doing behind the curtain. He wasn't supposed to. That was the point. Let him believe he was delivering hope while we watched. The data roll in behind the cameras. Clint's voice cracked slightly, but he steadied it. I regret it now. Not just because the secret came out, but because people disappeared, and we told ourselves it was for the greater good. He stood slowly, camera still rolling. You want to know what Echo Blue really was? It was the belief that peace could be staged, that trust could be engineered. But the problem with performance is it always ends. And when the curtain drops, all that's left is what you did when the world wasn't looking. He ended the video with a final line. I'll answer whatever comes next. That video, in its stripped-down honesty, shattered the last illusions left in the debate. Supporters of Clint were devastated. Critics were emboldened. The tribunal fast-tracked the investigation. Immunity was revoked for several lesser figures. Arrest warrants were prepared for 2 unnamed defense officials. A new UN subcommittee was formed to examine media complicity in humanitarian missions, but one man still hadn't spoken. The whistleblower behind the gray ribbon leaks. The cafe in Tunis was dim, hidden behind a mechanic shop and 2 rusted doors that looked like they hadn't been opened in years. Rachel and Maria stepped inside cautiously, their nerves high, the air dense with salt and diesel. A man in his 50s sat at the back table wearing a weathered scarf and dark sunglasses, even though the sun had set. His face was familiar, at least the version of it Rachel had seen in old UN surveillance stills. He stood without a word, nodded once, then motioned them to sit. This was Kamal Nur, the ghost in every Echo Blue file. The analyst who vanished. In 2008, with a hard drive and a death notice that was never fully explained, Rachel pulled out a recorder. Kamal held up his hand. No names, he said. No audio. I speak, you listen. You take notes if you want the full story. But nothing leaves this room until I'm done. Rachel nodded. Kamal leaned forward. Echo Blue wasn't just about Darfur. That was the test site, the model. But the strategy narrative symmetry they called it was rolled out in 8 regions after. Syria, Venezuela, parts of Eastern Europe, you name it. Anywhere public trust needed to be managed before. Military or economic intervention. He took out a small drive and placed it on the table like it weighed 100 pounds. That holds the full architecture. Not just names, but structure. Subdivisions of global newsrooms who were looped in. Marketing agencies tasked with repackaging. Trauma and celebrity handlers. Not just Eastwood. There were others. Maria leaned in. You mean they created storylines in advance of conflict? Yes, Kamal said. They built narrative corridors, pre-approved frames. So when violence broke out, the audience already had a lens to view it through. Peacekeeper becomes savior. Refugee becomes victim. Rebel becomes terrorist. And when public opinion reached the right threshold, boots on the ground became acceptable. Rachel whispered. It wasn't just spin. It was story engineering. Kamal nodded. They called it strategic empathy. Manufactured just enough sympathy to justify action, but never enough to demand accountability. He opened a small notebook. Yellowed from age. Inside were handwritten notes, dates, and one name circled over and over. Layla Kareen. She tried to stop it from the inside. But she wasn't just a translator. She was the pipeline. She leaked memos to local activists. She smuggled kids out of the detainment zones. That's why she was transferred. Then disappeared. Rachel felt her breath catch. Do you think she was silenced? I think she saw what Echo Blue was evolving into, and she became a threat. Kamal paused, looking straight at them. But her last message wasn't for the UN. It was for Denzel. I intercepted it before they could wipe her account. A voice note. You should hear it. He handed Rachel a second drive. This is what will break the world open. Back in New York, Joy Behar had already been summoned to appear before a closed-door ethics panel. Her legal team was trying to spin her actions as historical oversight, but the evidence was mounting. Leaked documents placed her at the center of the narrative council for 6 different Echo Phase missions. She wasn't just a strategist. She was a designer. That night, ABC suspended her pending investigation. She didn't argue. She simply went home, packed a small bag, and disappeared into Manhattan's dark folds. Meanwhile, Denzel Washington sat quietly in a hotel room in Geneva, the tribunal's protective security just outside. He had requested time alone before the final summit vote. No interviews, no public comments, until he received the message from Rachel. The voice note, it played with static at first. Then Layla's voice came through soft, urgent, fractured with fear. If you're hearing this, then they haven't buried everything. Denzel, you were never meant to carry this. They chose you because people trust your face more than they trust their governments. But what they did with that trust, it was a theft of lives, of dignity, of truth. She inhaled shakily. The children you met, the ones you took photos with, half of them never made it past the camps. I tried to stop them. I begged. But the orders were signed. Your smile was the final green light. Her voice cracked. They told me to lie to you, to coach you. I didn't. I couldn't. And for that, I paid. But if you hear this, you can still tell the world. Not the way they taught us, not with scripts. With truth. The recording ended. Denzel sat in silence for several minutes. Then he picked up his phone and made one call. To the tribunal chair, he said, I want to speak one last time. At the final session, the room was packed. Global leaders, journalists, the public. Every screen around the world tuned in. Denzel stood alone. No speech, no teleprompter, it's just his voice. I came here thinking I was a victim of a lie, he said. But now I know I was part of something much worse. I was the face they used to convince the world that suffering was manageable. That pain could be controlled. They told me I was saving lives. But the truth is, I was shielding the people who were ending them. He looked out across the chamber. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm demanding revelation. Not for me. For the children who disappeared. For the voices silenced. For the truths we let be rewritten by people who saw war as content and compassion. As currency, silence followed. Then applause, not of celebration, but of mourning, because finally, the story had been told, and for the first time in a generation, the world listened without illusion.